Public schools in this country are caught in the middle of a political debate over bathrooms. The Obama administration says restricting a transgender student's access to restrooms and locker rooms based on biological sex is discrimination and can be grounds for withholding funding. But that directive has set off some angry reaction. Kentucky is one state where many leaders don't agree with the president, and we look at how one school in Louisville decided to act proactively before the bigger debate began. Special correspondent Yasmin Qureshi of Education Week has the story. It's part of our weekly education series, Making the Grade.
What's it like to question your gender?
It's a little bit scary in the very beginning, I suppose, because you know that you're going to have to face a lot of discrimination. Like, go to the YouTube comments on any video about trans people and you'll see like just how many people are still like openly hostile to this idea.
17-year-old Maddie Dalton is transgender. She says she's always been a girl, but didn't know it.
Forever she had that little widow's peak.
She came out to her parents when she was 15 years old.
It was, chaotic at first, and the way I saw it in the very beginning when I was still coming to terms with it was if I had a friend who came to me and said that their child had come out to them as transgender, I would have thought, hooray, this young person is becoming who they are. So why would I not afford my own child that same blessing? So even though it was difficult, it's the only right thing to do.
Maddie is a junior at Atherton High School in Louisville, Kentucky. She was the first openly transgender student at the school.
I was a little bit hesitant right at first, but I knew that being at Atherton, I would be pretty safe.
A public high school with about 1,300 students, Atherton is one of the highest-ranked schools in the state. It's known for its international studies program and as a place where diversity is embraced.
All right, well, when you said happiness drives us to success, this is a little bit off, but
developing a safe climate for students is fundamental, and I think that we were doing that here before we ever started on the transgender issue.
Humanities teacher Tony Prince supervises the school's LGBT student group. Maddie confided in him about her newly realized gender identity.
I asked her what that means. What would the school look like to her if it were accepting of her as a transgender person? And so she wrote a little list of things. Let's say the people in theory agreed with this whole
I wanted
importance of happiness.
It to be enforced that students and teachers should use my name and pronouns, and to use the space that I identify with, so bathrooms and locker rooms.
Atherton didn't have a protocol for transgender students. The decision was left to Principal Dr. Thomas Aberle.
Our school protects all students, and the issue of gender identity has simply been a demonstration of the school's commitment to respecting all individuals in our school.
Aberle agreed to Maddie's requests, and after much consideration, so did the school's council, making it the first school in Kentucky to adopt an official policy for transgender students.
This policy is completely disregarding the privacy of all of their students.
A group of parents, students, and community members publicly objected and hired an attorney to appeal the decision.
The girls at this school expect to be able to go into a restroom and feel safe. Because of this policy, we no longer have that assurance.
The group called for transgender students to use a private or unisex bathroom.
Why would that be a problem for you?
First of all, it makes you a target for bullying and harassment. It puts it in everyone's minds that you are different and you are something to be looked at not as like a person, but as whatever characteristic is differentiating you, like being trans.
After months of debate at Atherton High School, the policy was upheld, but the opposition didn't stop there.
Young ladies, girls, may not want a biological male in their bathroom. That's kind of the traditional way we've done things since the founding of this nation.
Kent Ostrander is the director of the Family Foundation of Kentucky, a conservative advocacy organization. Last year, it supported a statewide bill that would have overturned Atherton's policy, but it was never passed into law.
The legislation simply said schools could do all kinds of accommodations for their students, including transgender students. But the one thing that they could not do is mix the biological sexes in a bathroom, a locker room, at the same time.
According to guidelines coming from the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Justice, that is discrimination.
Education policy professor Suzanne Eckes is referring to a letter the Obama administration sent to schools last month. It directed them to allow transgender students access to bathrooms and locker rooms based on their gender identity.
The department has interpreted gender identity to fall under the Title IX law, which prohibits discrimination based on sex. We don't have a lot of court guidance on it, so if you're in a state that has no litigation on this particular topic, the only thing you really have to go on is the Reason to Your Colleague letter.
However, several Republican state leaders are advising schools to ignore the guidance, putting them at risk of losing federal funding.
Why does there have to be a new federal government law telling everybody how they're going to do the bathrooms? That's just crazy. Why is the federal government interested in bathrooms? Because states can make that decision on their own. Parents can make that decision.
I don't think this is a Democrat or Republican or liberal or conservative issue. This is a civil rights issue. This isn't a state rights issue. This is a civil rights issue. Transgender students for years have been ostracized in public schools.
Nearly half of transgender teens report having suicidal thoughts, and their rates of depression and anxiety are far higher than the average.
Good morning, Atherton High School.
It's been over 2 years since Atherton High School adopted its bathroom policy, and several students at the school have since come out as transgender.
Unified basketball.
Principal Aberly says that despite early objections to the policy, most students have embraced it.
It's just going to the bathroom. You go do your business, then you wash your hands, and then you leave. It's just simple. And when people make a big deal about it, it just kind of gets blown out of proportion.
Coming from like a religious background, like I am Christian, and people don't necessarily agree with that type of stuff, but I've been going to this school for 2 years, and it's just routine. Like everyone goes to the restroom, everyone gets out. It's nothing, it's not a big deal.
Something I struggled with originally was just understanding the difference between what it meant to discriminate versus accommodate when it came to this issue. If any student said that they were uncomfortable with using a restroom, then they can choose an alternate restroom. But we are not to compel other people to act differently just because they make someone else feel uncomfortable. That is not what our country's about. That is not a right to privacy.
The school provides access to private faculty restrooms for any student who requests it.
It all comes down to being respected as a person and accepted. Now, that's all relying on the fundamental assumption that you respect being transgender as a legitimate, concept, as a legitimate thing. And I think that's where most of the trouble comes in.
In Louisville, Kentucky, this is Yasmin Qureshi of Education Week reporting for the PBS NewsHour.